In intelligence analysis, evaluating a source means asking two questions. What did they claim, and where could that information have come from? The second question is often more revealing than the first. A source who describes something they couldn't have known independently is more credible than one who describes something available to anyone. This episode, we're going to apply that test to Bob Lazar. What was already public in 1989? What wasn't? And what does the gap between those two categories tell us about where his information actually came from? Let's start with the claim that has generated the most debate, element 115. In May 1989, when Lazar first went public, the periodic table's heaviest confirmed element was element 109, meitnerium, first synthesized in 1982. Elements 110 through 118 were theoretical. They had been predicted by nuclear shell models, but none had been synthesized. Element 115 didn't have a proper name. It was a placeholder in a theoretical framework. Lazar described element 115 in very specific terms. He said it was a super heavy element with unusual stability, that unlike the elements near it on the periodic table, which decay within milliseconds, the isotope used at S4 was stable enough to be handled. He said it was not synthesized on Earth, that the samples at S4 had been provided along with the craft, and that no human technology at the time could produce it. In 2003, a joint team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Russia synthesized element 115 for the first time. It was named Moscovium in 2016. The isotopes they produced had half-lives measured in milliseconds. This is where Lazar's critics stop. The stuff decays in milliseconds, just like everything else up there on the periodic table. Lazar was wrong about the stability. Case closed. But this is not where a careful analyst stops. There are actually two components to the element 115 claim, and they need to be kept separate. The first is the stability prediction. The May 1989 issue of Scientific American named element 115 as a predicted stable element before Lazar went on camera. A technically literate person who read that issue could have built from it. The second is the possession claim, that a stable, handleable sample was already sitting in a Nevada facility in 1989, in quantities large enough to fuel a reactor provided by an extraterrestrial civilization. This looks like a separate leap, but it may not be. If you start with the stability concept and decide to build a fuel source around it, handleability follows naturally. A stable element is by definition an element that doesn't decay in your hand. The possession claim may simply be the logical extension of a premise a fabricator already had. When element 115 was finally synthesized in 2003, it decayed in milliseconds. Lazar's version was solid enough to hold. That gap is real. But whether it reflects inside knowledge or a reasonable extrapolation from public literature is a question the evidence cannot definitively answer. The physics was derivable. Whether the possession claim was too, that's where the analysis runs out, not diagnostic. Lazar describes the propulsion as follows. The reactor bombards element 115 with protons, triggering an antimatter reaction that produces what he calls a gravity A wave. The craft amplifies and focuses this wave, warping space-time around itself, moving the destination to the craft rather than the craft to the destination. In 1994, physicist Miguel Alcubierre published a paper in Classical and Quantum Gravity describing exactly this mechanism. Contracting space-time in front of a craft and expanding it behind so that the craft moves without technically moving through space. The conceptual framework is identical to what Lazar described in 1989. Alcubierre was a professional physicist at a serious institution, and his 1994 warp drive paper was considered genuinely novel. The concept was not sitting in the literature waiting to be found. If Lazar independently arrived at the same idea 5 years earlier, that says something significant about his theoretical capabilities. Capabilities that are very hard to square with everything the credential record tells us about him. When evaluating a source, you don't just ask whether their claims are accurate, you ask which ones are accurate, which aren't, and what that pattern tells you about where the information came from. Lazar's claims break into 3 categories. First category, already verifiable in 1989. The Area 51 layout, the bus route, the security procedures, details any base employee would know. Element 115 also belongs here, as the May 1989 Scientific American named it as a predicted stability candidate before his broadcast. Second category, unverifiable in 1989, but partially confirmed later. The propulsion model. Lazar described warping space-time around the craft rather than pushing it through space. 5 years later, Miguel Alcubierre independently published something functionally similar. The parallel isn't exact, but Lazar's description sat closer to where the physics went than anything available at the time. Third category, still unverified today. The 9 craft, the briefing documents, the alien origin, the Zeta Reticuli reference, the Teller connection, and the element 115 possession claim, which is separate from the theoretical prediction. There's a fourth category of evidence worth examining, claims that were already in public circulation before Lazar appeared. Not unverifiable, already out there. The government secrecy at Groom Lake was being reported in the mid-1980s. Zeta Reticuli had been the established alien origin point since 1974, and 7 months before Lazar's broadcast, documented Air Force disinformation agent Richard Doty named it on national television. Lazar named the same star system 7 months later. The most precisely documented overlap is John Lear's December 1987 statement, published on a public computer network 17 months before Lazar's first broadcast. Lear's statement contains Groom Lake as the secret facility, recovered craft being test flown there, MJ-12 as the controlling authority, Edward Teller as an MJ-12 member. Every non-physics element of Lazar's account was already in that document. And Lear is the man who introduced Lazar to George Knapp. Lazar also confirmed he'd seen the 1980 film Hangar 18, a mainstream release depicting recovered alien craft at a classified government facility. The gray alien description he attributes to his S4 briefing documents was already the dominant form in popular culture. Every narrative element Lazar describes, except one of the physics claims, existed in the public or semi-public record before he appeared. That distribution is consistent with all of the hypotheses. It doesn't discriminate between them, which is why we need evidence that does. So what would discriminate between these hypotheses? Let me tell you what I think has the most diagnostic value. The question of corroboration. In 35 years, not one person who claims to have been inside S4 has come forward to support Lazar's account. This matters because Area 51 has produced name-documented witnesses to conventional classified programs, men like T.D. Barnes and James Noce, who worked on Project Oxcart and spoke publicly about it. Major programs produce multiple sources over time. For the whistleblower hypothesis, this is inconsistent, and not weakly. Real programs with real personnel leak. 35 years of total silence is close to fatal. For the fabricator hypothesis, this is consistent. No facility means no witnesses. For the disinformation hypothesis, it's also fully consistent. If S4 was staged for Lazar's benefit, there are no other witnesses by design. In our next episode, we score the full matrix. We weight every item of evidence against every hypothesis. We identify the probability leaders, and we sit with the conclusion that ACH always delivers, not certainty, but calibrated uncertainty, which is the most honest thing an analyst can offer. This is the Circle Jerk. Stay analytical.